Morning, Rabbosai. We'll continue with our introduction. We're studying the Beis Hamikdash and specifically the Heichal. We're here on page Zion on the top, and it's Os Pei Beis. Yesterday, we discussed a place called the Beis Horodas Hamayim, which was on the northern side of the Heichal, and that's where they took the waters that were falling down on the roof, and they completely disposed of those waters. And now we learned that there was a kosel, there was an outer wall on that side of the Heichal that would cover and be makif this Beis Horodas Hamayim. Then we're up to Pei Gimel. Kavla shel shayish. When you entered into the Heichal and you turned right, which means you're turning towards the north, in such a case, they put down a table that was made of marble, and on that table, they would make a mixture of afar and mei chatos. The afar was taken from the karka, and it was mixed with mayim, and that concoction was given to a suspected adulteress who had what's called kini and stira, about which there's an entire Masechta called sota. And when they made this concoction, they would have her drink this concoction, and if she was guilty, she would perish. Now we're up to the three most important features of the Heichal, and these are the Shulchan, the Menorah, and the Mizbeach. And we want to study what they look like and where they were located within the Heichal. So first we'll start with the Shulchan, which was the showbread table for the Lechem Aponim, and it was a table that climbed up vertically and had two sections to it, one for 6 lechamim on the right and another 6 lechamim on the left, all told 12 lechamim that were replaced every Shabbos. Where in the Heichal was it? It was in the north of the Heichal. So that means you entered into the Heichal from the east and you turned right towards the north. And it was really almost up against the wall of the Heichal on the northern side. The distance between the Shulchan for the Lechem Aponim and the wall of the Heichal, the Kosel HaHeichal, was all told 2.5 amos. So it was very close, so to speak, placed on the northern side. It was made of gold, as was the menorah and the Mizbeach in the Heichal. Everything was gold. And it was situated in which its length went from Mizrach to Ma'arav, meaning Mizrach, as we said over and over again, is the direction through which you enter into the Migdash and the Heichal, and the Shulchan was situated in that direction. So you didn't turn it around the other way, because we'll see in the case of the menorah, they would turn it around from north to south, so that the menorah would be facing you. But as far as the Shulchan is concerned, the Shulchan would be always on your right. It would be contiguous to the wall on your right. This is the north, and it stretched from east to west. Then we get to the menorah. The menorah was on the southern side of the Heichal. That's very important, because our minhag, for example, to light Hanukkah in the menorah of Hanukkah in the Beis HaKnesses also requires that we put it on the right side, which is the Daron. Now, again, it doesn't always have to be the right side. It really depends on where the directions are, but it's always got to be Daron. It's got to be on the south side, which means that instead of turning right when you enter into the Heichal to get to the Shulchan, you turn left to get to the menorah. How far left did you go? How far to the Daron? Shtei amos v'chetzi mikosel ha'Heichal. So we spoke about the Shulchan, which is really contiguous, right next to the Kosel on the right side, which is on the north side. And now we're talking about the menorah all the way on the other side of the Heichal, to the left towards the Daron, and it's again 2.5 amos away from the Kosel on the side Daron. In other words, the menorah was not tilted east-west, sort of up against the wall, but rather the face of the menorah is what you saw when you walked in to the Heichal and you turned towards your right, towards your south, you saw the menorah in that direction. So once again, getting back to Hanukkah for a moment, what we should have is that if you're walking, let's say from north to south, you will see the menorah right in front of you in the Beis HaKnesses on Hanukkah. And that's a zecher to the menorah in the Mikdash. Ba'hayu madlikim sheva neros bein harbayim. The Torah tells us that the menorah was lit towards the end of the day, and it would remain lit throughout the night until the morning, which means that they had to put a lug shemen, enough of a volume of oil that it would last through the night. And then haisa dolekes mi erev had boker. And now in the morning, we're going to do what's called hatovas haneros. And that means to clean out the wicks and the oils, the residue of oils, so that the menorah is now ready for its next hadlaka. They would clean out the menorah. May efer hapsilos. Right, there are certain ashes that come from the burnt up wicks. The wicks were burnt and became ash, and that had to be cleaned out. And again, keep in mind that the wicks were lit throughout the night. So for 12 hours or whatever hours they were lit, and they burnt up and created afer, that has to be cleaned out. Umetivim es shivas nerosel kol boker. Every morning there was a mitzvah of hatovas haneros to clean out all the residue of afer, of ash, and oil, and the like. Now, the Rambam has a unique shita, which he mentions he annotates it in the note here, that there was a double mitzvah each day of hadlakas haneros. Not only was the menorah lit at night bein harbayim, but after the hatova in the morning, there was another hadlaka of boker. Most Rishonim understood there was only one hadlaka per day, and that was bein harbayim at night. And in the morning, it's just a mitzvah of hatovas haneros to prepare them for the lighting bein harbayim. The Rambam has 2 hadlakos every day. Now, the menorah was quite high. He doesn't tell you here exactly the height of the menorah, but he says, "B'tzad menorah yu sholosh madregos me even shalem hayakoin omed umetiv es haneros." That in order to reach the top of the menorah, you had to have 3 steps, that the Kohen would climb these 3 steps in order to reach the top of the menorah where he would light the menorah. Now, he doesn't go into detail here about the menorah. He's just giving us a little bit of a flavor. He says that the menorah was made of gold. That's true in the Bayis Rishon. I don't know, he doesn't point it out. Later on in the Mizbeach, he's going to make this point. But with regard to the difference between Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni, the menorah in Bayis Sheni was made of wood. And the Gemara codifies the principle called Chasa Rachmana al Mamonim Shal Yisrael. Bayis Sheni was a period of poverty in Israel, and God had mercy and compassion. He accepted a menorah of wood as opposed to the menorah of zahav. So if you've seen in the art, one of the topics that's very popular in art, the biblical art, is taking the menorah. You'll see such a piece of art if you're ever at, when this pandemic ends and they open up the museum, the National Museum in Haratzof, in Givat Ram, and you will see there a painting from a French painter, Poisson. I'm not pronouncing his name properly, but anyway, he painted a painting of the taking of the menorah out of the Mikdash, and the menorah is made of gold. And I would have to assume that he's referring to the Churban of Bayis Rishon. There are other ideas mentioned in Chazal about the menorah. The reason why, for example, the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah comes from the great miracle in the menorah is because that miracle indicates that God, even the most difficult of times, has not forsaken the Jewish people, and Shechina Shora b'Yisrael. And there was a great miracle with the middle candle of the menorah. And Chazal speak about the menorah as representative of the light of Torah and wisdom, 7 branches for 7 branches of wisdom, and so forth and so on. The menorah seems to be one of the most outstanding symbols of Klal Yisrael. Very rarely will you see the Mizbeach or the Shulchan as symbols of Klal Yisrael. But the menorah, because it's Shechina Shor b'Yisrael, that we are the chosen people, and the daily miracle that took place in the menorah, this becomes something so beloved to Klal Yisrael, becomes the symbol of our people. Then we get to the menorah, to the Mizbeach. Now the Mizbeach in the Heichal is called the Mizbach HaZav because it's made of gold. And was it located midway in the middle between the Shulchan on the right side on the north and the menorah on the left side on the south? Not exactly. He says it was Be'emtza Rochav HaHeichal Michetzi Orach HaHeichal Ulifnim. So again, if you would draw a line, meaning if you would measure from the beginning of the Heichal to the end of the Heichal, going from east to west, then the Mizbeach is located halfway. This is called the Orech, halfway into the Heichal. Bein Shulchan u'Menorah. Okay, we have the Shulchan on the right and the menorah on the left, so it's between them. But Mashuch Tzas Klape Tzad HaMizrach. The Mizbeach HaZav was a little bit closer to the menorah on the right side, on the east. So it was not situated in the middle. Again, it was in the middle as far as Orech is concerned, halfway between the beginning of the Heichal and the end of the Heichal, but it was not in the middle as far as the width is concerned. With the, you couldn't measure the distance from the menorah to the Shulchan and say, let's split it right down the middle and put the Mizbeach HaZav right there. The Mizbeach HaZav had to be towards the east. And this, I would assume, is symptomatic, or shall we say, personifies the concept that the Shechina is in the east. Now, what was the function of the Mizbeach HaZav? Of course, you'll tell me that there were korbanos that were brought on the Mizbeach HaZav. That's not true. That's a major mistake. There were no korbanos whatsoever that were brought on the Mizbeach HaZav. Even calling it a Mizbeach is a funny kind of a term, like a borrowed term. The only thing that was burnt on the Mizbeach was on a daily basis, and that's the Ketores. Shachar ubein arbaim. Twice during the day, we brought the Ketores and burnt it on the Mizbeach HaZav. And according to the Rambam, that's very similar to what we saw with regard to that Lotas HaMenorah, which was Boker and Bein Arbaim. So too, we have, according to all Rishonim, in the case of the Mizbeach, we have Haktoros both in the morning and in the evening. Al Mizbeach Zeh. So what kind of avoda was done on the Mizbeach HaPnimi, the Mizbeach HaZav, other than the Ketores? Were there any karbanos? Again, we said we're not makriv any karbanos. There's no haktorah on the Mizbeach HaZav, but there was what's called hazah, the sprinkling of dam. And this took place on Yom HaKippurim, when the Kohen Gadol would take the dam hapar and the dam ha'sa'ir, and he would mix it together in one receptacle, and then he'd do a hazah first in the Kodesh Kodshim, and that was on the paroches, and then he would go out to the Mizbach Hazav and do another series of Hazos on the Mizbach Hazav. V'chein hayumazin all of the Shar Porim Hanisrafim. So in addition to the Hazah of the dam of the par v'soyer that were mixed together in one receptacle, we also have a hazah of parim hanisrafim. For example, we have par helim dovashal tzibur or par shal Mashiach, and those parim were burnt outside of the Mikdash. And there was a mitzvah of hazah with the dam of parim hanisrafim, and hazah was done on the mizbach hazav inside the heichal. V'chein, the also lahaktir karbonos al mizbech hapnimi, no karbonos. Shenemar lo salu olav ketores zara the ola umincha benesach lo tasischu ola. So there is no hakrovas karbonos on the mizbach hazav. This hazah and hazah took place on Yom Kippur, both with regard to the mixture of dam asor and dam apar, and with regard to the parim hanisrafim. But hazah, yes, hakrova, no. There's no haktorah on the mizbeach hazah. Now I'm a little bit disappointed that he doesn't tell you the height of the mizbeach hazah. I think it was quite relative to the mizbach hanachoshes. It was relatively smaller. Wait, you know what? Maybe we could see that in the diagram. Let's just see. Oh, he has a picture here of the heichal. Yeah, the mizbeach is quite small. All right, so we'd have to do a little bit more research and learn a little bit more about the mizbeach hazav, exactly how it was structured and height and dimensions. Now he has something called kinei zahav. Okay, then now in the heichal, if you move west, so we're moving past the menorah on our left, the shulchan on our right, the mizbeach more or less in the middle, and we go towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim. We now meet up with two golden objects that are standing on the ground, and they are kinei zav. What is the role of the kinei zav? Shnei kinei zav hayu beheichal. It's interesting. Everything so far in the heichal is zav. And the Kohen Gadol, when he went into the Kodesh Kadoshim, he did not bring zav in there because ein kateger nas sanega. But here, gold is no problem. And on the contrary, the Gemara in Masechta Shkolim seems to indicate that the people of Israel were involved in the process of tshuva for the Chet HaEgel, and they contributed as much gold as they possibly could for the building of the Mishkan. And in the Heichal, we really needed all this gold. Aleim ha'yemeniach kohen gadol b'yom ha'kippurim es mizrukei dam hapar v'dam hasoyer. This seems like a secondary function. First of all, it's only once a year on Yom Kippur. Okay, that doesn't bother me so much. But he says that these kinei zav were only there to hold on to the mizrach. Lahazos min adam b'kodesh kadoshim beheichal keneged badei ha'aron. So he's got these mizrakei dam, and the hazah is going to be done from the mizrakim. It's very interesting. We have a mizrak already, and we used it in the mizbeach hachitzon, but now we need a special mizrak, which is called kinei zav. They were, I should say in the plural, they were designated for their own avoda. You can't use the old tried and true mizrak that you used in the mizbeach hachitzon for the hazos in the Kodesh Kadoshim. but rather the Mizrake Adam for the par, the dam par, and the dam asoyer. And he's got to be mazeh with this dam in the Kodesh Kadoshim on the Kapores. And where does he place these Mizrake dam? On the Kinei Zav. Let's just see if we can, I don't know how much time we have, but try to fit in one more paragraph here. The Amo Traxin. He says between the Heichal and the Kodesh Kadoshim, there was one Amma that was left as a separation between the two. During the Bayis Rishon, the Amma was filled in by a kosel. There was actually a wall that was situated in that, or structured in that Amma, and that wall would separate between the Heichal and the Kodesh Kadosh. But Bayis Sheni, where there was a much taller building, they couldn't build a kosel that would go all the way up in a width of one Amma. That would have been an architectural feat, and apparently it was too difficult in Bayis Sheni. And all this is in a sugya in Masechta Yoma on Daf Nun Aleph. Now the Chachamim paskin that the Amma has a questionable status. This Amma Traxin, Safek im Kedushasa Kedushas Pnima Kedushas Chutz. What status does it have? Is it part of the Heichal and as Kedushas Heichal, or is it part of the Kodesh Kadoshim and it's upgraded to the status of Kedushas Kodesh Kadoshim? So the Chachamim say it's a suffix. We cannot draw any definite conclusions. Suffix in Kedushasa Kedushas Pnim, meaning the Kedusha of the Kodesh Kadoshim, or Kedushas Chutz, the Kedusha of the Heichal. L'kach hayushtei parochos bein hakodesh ubein kodesh kadoshim. So let's try to understand why they needed two parochos to separate. See, what I understand is that if the Amma that separates the Heichal from the Kodesh Kadoshim is part of the Kodesh Kadoshim, then the paroches should be on the outside, meaning closer to the Heichal, indicating that as soon as you move beyond its parochas towards the west, you are entering into an Amma which is sanctified with the Kedusha of Kodesh Kadoshim. If, on the other hand, we come to the conclusion that this Amma, Traxin, has the status of the Heichal, then on the contrary, the parochas should be past that Amma, at the end of that Amma, separating the Heichal from the Kodesh Kadosh. So at the end, since the Chachamim didn't know, they vacillated on this point as to what the status of the Amma Traxin is, whether it's part of the Heichal, whether it's part of the Kodesh Kadoshim. They would set up two parochases. They parochos, bein HaKodesh ubein Kodesh HaKadosh. Hamerchak beineim hu Amma zu. So it makes sense that if they they put up two parochos, one on the Heichal side, the other on the Kodesh Kadoshim side, the distance between the two parochos would have to be one Amma, because that's the Traxin. That's exactly what the Traxin was. Parochas hachitzona isa psucha letzad darom. Now, it's if you want to get access to the outer parochas, means that you're still within the heichal, then you have access through the southern side. Shahaisa mikupeles bitzad darom. They would roll up the parochas in order to get entryway into this Amma, and that was all on the south side. Vakipol yitolui bekeresh shel zahav kidei shelo tisager. In other words, when they were going in and out, and they need to roll up the parochas, they would make sure that they would roll it up, and they would be tola it bekeresh shel zav. They would tie it up with some sort of golden knots or ropes that would make sure that it would stay up, that the parochas in this rolled state would stay up. Ve'haparochas hapnimis, which was so now we're going to the second parochas, which was beyond that Amma, at the border between the Heichal and the Kodesh Kodshim. So now we're holding that the Amma Traxin has the status of Heichal. And he says that Parochas Hapnimis, which is right there entering into the Kodesh Kodshim, Hoisa Psucha B'tzad Safon. The access to it was on the northern side. Shegam Hoisa Mekupeles Utluya Bekeres Shel Zahav Kidei Shelo Tisager. He says that the parochas on the northern side, which is on the inner side, was held up after it was rolled by a keres shel zahav. Now, I'm not sure, but he seems to indicate that it was a greater security measure or a greater nervous tension about the parochas hapnimis to guarantee that it would be accessible without the parochas that was rolled up falling down. And to guarantee that the parochas would not fall down when it was rolled up, they would attach it with a keres shel zahav. Now, why is it called an Amma Traxin? Rashi in Masechta Yoma says it's an Amma Traxin, Lashon Pnim V'chutz. So the word Traxin, according to this interpretation of Rashi, is simply defining that it's Pnim and Chutz, which means it has this ambiguous status. It's Pnim, meaning like the Kodesh Kodshim, but it's Chutz, like the Heichal. All right, so let's just make a note of where we got up to here. That in Yirtzeh Hashem on Yom Rishon, we could talk about the Kodesh Kodshim. That would be a nice way of starting the week of Purim with the Kodesh Kodshim.